All right, welcome to this online class. So what I'm going to be working on today is talking about color theory when it comes to both blending fibers for spinning or felting or whatever it is I'm doing, as well as dyeing. So I've got dyes up here and I've got fibers down here, which I will work with on the blending board. So let's just start with some basic color theory. Okay, so if I now take my three primaries, yellow, magenta, and cyan, and if I mix those together, which I've done just beforehand, I mix yellow and blue together, I will get green. If I mix blue and magenta together, I will get this beautiful vibrant purple. And if I mix yellow and magenta together, I'm going to get orange. If I take more magenta and a little bit of yellow, I am now getting a red. So this is actually red rather than magenta. So I can even put a little more yellow into this. I started with a magenta, and if I add yellow to it, I actually end up with red dye. And if I put that onto my yarn, I will end up with red yarn. Okay, so this fiber here, this color, I actually achieved this with yellow and magenta, as well as some other reds or oranges actually, in order to get this orangey red color. All right, so this is one of the reasons why the red, blue, yellow primary colors doesn't actually work, is because primary colors are colors that you can't achieve by mixing other colors together. So I can't get yellow by mixing any other colors. I can't get cyan by mixing other colors. I can get royal blue by mixing cyan with other colors. But I cannot get magenta by mixing other colors. However, if I have magenta and I have yellow, I can get red. So this explains why your three primaries are actually yellow, magenta, and cyan rather than yellow, red, and blue. Okay, if you take the red, let me show you this. If I take my red that I've just made, okay, and then I put blue with it, just a little bit, I'm not going to do too much. Let's mix it together. We're not quite there yet, a little bit more. It's kind of purplish, isn't it? But it's not a beautiful, vibrant purple like the one I have here. So you can see quite clearly, if I use my pipette to put a drop on here, okay, this is the true purple that I get, okay, with the cyan and magenta. Compared with the dusty purple that I get if I try to use a red. So the reason you get this dusty purple is that the red actually, this purple here actually contains parts of all three primary colors. Okay, so you get this slightly brownish, what we call muddy effect. Anytime you have a color that involves all three primaries, you're going to get muddying of that color. Okay, so these are nice and vibrant, but if I start putting green, with some magenta, I'm going to get a muddy brownish color. If I start adding blue cyan to an orange, I'm going to get a muddy brownish color. The type of muddy brownish color you get actually depends quite drastically on the proportions, okay? Some of them are quite pretty, like this one, and others will not be so great. Let's have a quick chat about black, very, very briefly. This color, as I said before, this is made with magenta, a little bit of yellow, and a little bit of blue. So at the moment it's purple. I'll just put the rest of it in there. But if I want to get a bit clever, and I take a little bit of green, not too much, and I start to put in some green. Okay, we're obviously getting to a brown. Right now we've got quite a lovely brown. That's beautiful. Okay, I start adding a bit more of some of these colors, particularly the blue because it's a dark color. You're going to notice something happening. So now the color I've got here and the color I've got here are actually very, very similar. Okay, here's my board. Okay, so this is the black dye, and the one in the smaller container is the color that I've just mixed. So let's take the black dye, let's put some of that here. Okay, and I might even just use this so you can see. Okay, black dye, and there's a paper towel just to show it a bit more clearly. This is a true black, so it's not actually going to split. A lot of black dyes are made up of other colors, surprisingly enough, and so they will split. And here is the one that I made myself. So yeah, here we go. You can see that colors starting to split. So I can make black. This is still black. Okay, this color is, it's definitely black. But because it is made up of these other colors, what happens to the dye is it actually splits out, and you can see the blue and the green, and even to a certain extent the red, the magenta coming through here. On this one, because it is a true black dye, I don't get any of that splitting. Okay, so that's really important when you're dyeing. Not so important if you're blending fibers, because you really won't notice it. But if you're dyeing, having a true black dye is very, very helpful, because although you can achieve the color by mixing, you won't be able to get something that doesn't split like this. Okay, so let's put these out the way and let's start talking about how that works when we're blending and what we need to do in order to get the colors that we want when we are making fiber or when we're spinning, whatever it is we're doing. Okay, so I've got my little blending board here. So let's just quickly do a small piece just here. I'm just going to blend, put a bit of yellow down. Okay, I'm just going to look at a little. I'm not going to push it too far down because I want you to be able to see what is going on. So what you can see now is that I've got yellow, and where the pink, the magenta and the yellow cross over, you'll see that as an orangey, possibly reddish color, depending on how much they blend. We then go into the straight magenta. Where the blue and magenta cross over, you can see a purple. Then we get a green where the blue and yellow cross over as well. Okay, so you're getting that spectrum of colors through there. That's all great as long as when you're spinning through those colors. So only working with the colours are next to each other. They're called analogous colours. Okay, so blue and green and yellow are analogous. Green, blue, purple, analogous. If you're working with those colours that are next to each other, then you won't have too many problems with your spinning. They will blend together quite nicely, and you'll kind of end up with a soft rain, you know, fade type of effect, especially if you're working through from the end of a roll lag. So you'd be spinning from one end to the other of a roll lag. However, if you start to put other colours into it, or you're spinning it, you know, if I tried to get this as a bat and then I just spun from the end of this bat, right, rather than from the side. If I spun from the end of a bat like this, let's just lift this up a little bit so you can see. Okay, I would start to get all of these colours coming together, and they would all blend, and they would actually start to create a lot of browns or very, very muddy effects. Okay, you wouldn't get this beautiful rainbow effect if you were to spin them as a bat. So as a roll lag, this would work fine because you're coming from one end through, and you'd end up with almost a, you know, you'd end up with a rainbow type effect. You might get some muddy areas, but you would mainly end up with the rainbow effect. I actually spun up a rainbow bat, well, it's actually rainbow tops, recently, and you can see that because they were small bits of fibre, you ended up with all the colours spinning up together. I didn't spin super fine. The end of my bottom's fallen off. So I didn't spin super fine. So I've actually got quite a lot of the colours coming together. Now up close, you can see all of that detail, and it's very, very pretty. If you start to take that further and further away, you will get a muddier and muddier appearance. So from a distance, this will sort of look like some of the colours, but it tends to take on a slightly brownish look, and you can see it more in some places than in others. Okay, so here where it's folded back on itself, from a distance that will start to look quite brown. Okay, up close, very, very pretty. From a distance, doesn't have that same colour definition. So when you spin something with lots of different colours all next to each other, a full rainbow all coming next to each other. So if I spun from the end of this bat, I would probably end up with quite a muddy yarn at the end of it. If I spun from one end, I'd end up with a rainbow through. But what does that mean when you're starting to add other things to your fibres, to your roll lags? So what that means is you want to be quite careful about what you're adding in. If I just start coming back over this orangish area with some blue fibre, I am going to muddy it up. It is going to turn into a brown. That's what's going to come out the other end. Same thing will happen if I decide that I actually want to use some orange fibre and I start bringing that into the blue. I'll pull it out again in a sec. But you actually see, all right, you can immediately see that this has gone quite brownish where I've got that orange over the top of it. If what you want to go for is a brown colour, great, that's ideal. I personally like quite bright colours, so I'll always work, try and work with analogous colours as much as possible. That said, I am also a huge fan of fibres and yarns and things that pick things from the opposite sides of the colour wheels. So how do you do that without creating a giant muddy mess? One of the tricks is to use different fibres. So if I've got wool mainly here, it's mainly merino with a bit of silk through it, and I come back into it with something like a pure silk, so this is mulberry silk. This type of fibre, silk fibre, tends to clump itself together, and when you spin it, you'll end up with pieces of the silk coming through. So I could lay that in this area here, and when I spin that, I will get a sliver of the blue silk coming through, and it will give you those little pops. Okay, so if I came in with them in some of these places, you wouldn't have the same blending issues that you will have if you used another fibre that just blends into the rest of your creation. Okay, so you can play around with adding different types of things in. So you could add in some little pieces. You can also use silk, you know, dragging it over the whole blending board. But in this case, by keeping them quite a little bit separate, I will get these little shots of colour through. I tend to prefer to do those shots in non-colours, just so you get a pop of white or something through. The other way you can do it, black, can also be a really, really cool way to add in some of these other types of fibres. Okay, just coming in with a bit of black. Now black you have to be a little careful with. Black on yellow will tend to make you a brown. When you stick it with blues and magentas, it does tend to work quite nicely. So consider how you're using your blacks. It will make yellows appear mustard, but blues and magentas, it will actually deepen the colour. So you end up with something that is a bit more of a gemstone type, you know, vibrant colour. And the same will happen with green. You put black onto green, and you can actually see that here. This was a very straight standard green, and where this black comes onto it, it just deepens it and gives it that depth and vibrancy. Okay, so using black works really, really, really well on your blues and magentas, greens, purples. When you hit the yellows and oranges, what it does is gives you more of the ochre-y, the mustardy type of colours. Okay, so you won't get, it's a different effect that it has when it goes on to yellow. Okay, so something we haven't talked about yet is white. Now, when we're talking about dyes, white is really just reducing the amount of dye compared to the fibre that you're dyeing, or the amount of water, depending on what it is you're actually doing. But when it comes to fibres, obviously we have white or neutral, natural fibres that we can use. So I think it's fairly self-explanatory what white does, but if I come over the top with white, it's going to soften those colours down. And sometimes this can be a good way if you've got a really intense colour palette like I have here, where I've got this rainbow. If I come over that with white and soften it down with some white, I've got, this is a silk or a bamboo, this might be bamboo. No, this is silk. Okay, if I come over it with these, it softens down those colours and will actually help it to be more cohesive. So one of the other ways I use that when I'm working, and you can see along this edge already, it just makes it feel a bit more like it all belongs together rather than these separate pieces. Even those inclusions now are blended in. So with this yarn that I spun up, this was the rainbow bat, rainbow tops. I applied it with some white, and the effect that this has, yes, it's barber pole, and this is actually a bamboo that I've spun up here. So this then allows all those colours to kind of have space to breathe. It softens them down a bit so you can see them from a distance. I might have to just tip this up just a touch so you can see. Okay, from a distance, the two give quite a different impression. Okay, this one you can see from a distance, it is actually getting quite muddy. This one, you get a bit more vibrancy to it. It's a softer kind of colour, and it just keeps the colours all a bit more separate. So when you knit this up or crochet it or weave it or whatever it is you're doing, the colours will have a bit more separateness to them, and it allows those colours to pop a bit more. So sometimes if you are working with lots of colours at once, white could well be your friend. So let's put a little bit more into this. Just finish off this bat. Okay, so you can see as I pull this roll lag off, on the outer layer you can see the full rainbow there, and as I pull them through you can see the effect it's going to have on the final spin to some extent. So that layer of white with a bit of the black in it, it's enhancing where the black is and softening with the white. Okay, so you can see how that's going to come out, and obviously using the silk, those areas are staying somewhat separate. Okay, I like to do quite big roll lags, especially in this case, because if I make two smaller ones we're going to end up with two rainbows. If I keep it all as one, then we will have one nice big long rainbow. So I don't always pull the very end of my roll lags off the board because that end bit can sometimes be a little bit harder to spin. So I will grab those end bits with the board, and I actually use them as little mini bats for myself. So there we go. Waste not, what not. This is my little mini bat that I will then play with myself for my own spinning. I sometimes just grab them and have a bit of fun making up wild and wacky yarns myself. So it's like a little mini bat that I can spin up if I wish. You could also use those for felting. Like, could be quite a lot of fun actually for a wet felting project, something like this. You can imagine sort of putting that over the top of a balloon and wet felting yourself a little rainbow. So lots of things you can do with those end bits. You don't have to take them off. A lot of people leave them on. I just prefer the way it makes my roll lags come out. So now you can see this roll lag, so it was laying that way. You can see the full rainbow of colours, but you can also see where the black is with the yellow. Definitely got a slightly muddy look, but where the black comes up against the magenta and the blue, it doesn't muddy it in the same way. Okay, so that's something to remember. Yellows with black, not necessarily friends, but when they go against the magentas and the blues, they can come out quite vibrant still. So I've done a lot of talking about getting bright, vibrant colours. I love my bright, vibrant colours, but we all don't always want to be super bright, super vibrant all the time. So how do you work with colours that are more muted and are mixtures of your primaries without ending up with brown every single time. Okay, so if I've got a softer green, instead of putting that with a red, although that works better, as you can see, than this one does, right? That softness will soften down the red a little bit, and what you actually end up with would be more of a pinker tone. Okay, so you could work with these together. You could either go to the next tertiary, okay, so going with a soft green with a bright orange, with an orange, can work, because the softness of that color helps to make less of the brown. It'll still dull it down a little, but you don't get that same muddiness. Okay, it's more of a softening than a muddying. So there's quite a different effect by bringing a soft color. Okay, there's the soft green with an orange. Here's even soft green with the red. It's probably a bit too pale, that bit. Okay, soft green with the red compared to the deep green with the red. Okay, so you can see the differences you get with different blends. So whenever you're thinking about what colors you want to use when blending, or even when applying with two different fibers, what you want to avoid doing is taking your colors that are opposite each other on the color wheel, yellow and purple, magenta or red, and green, although that one can work if you pick the right shades, and blue and orange. If you're just spinning those together, you can end up and letting them blend. So if you're applying, doing a barber pole with them, the blending together will give you a yarn that in the end looks brown. Okay, you can still use these colors that are opposite each other, for sure, and I do it all the time. I spun up something recently that was orange and purple with some blue inclusions, okay, and it looks lovely. It's spun up really nicely, but when you're making it, you need to consider, are they going to be next to each other? So if you're using a blending board and you're going to blend it in such a way that your orange is not on top of your blue, you're not spinning them together, but it moves from an orange into a blue, then you will have a beautiful yarn. If you start laying your oranges and your blues over the top of each other, you will get a brown. If you spin one orange ply and one blue ply together from a distance, that yarn will look brown. That doesn't mean it's not going to be attractive. Browns can be very, very beautiful, but if you're after, you know, those vibrant colors, stick to the analogous colors on the color wheel. Okay, so even purple, magenta and orange can be an interesting one. You can get quite nice effects, but what you don't want to end up with is your orange and your purple right next to each other. Same goes for any analogous colors, unless it is two primaries and a secondary. So if I try to go purple, blue and green, as long as I keep my green away from my purple and they don't blend together, I will have vibrant colors. If I have these three, red, magenta, purple and blue, I can work with all three in a combination because these two make this one. Blue, yellow and green, same thing. Yellow, magenta and orange will also work. So if you're using two primaries and a secondary, any arrangement will work beautifully. If you are using 2 secondaries and a primary, then you'll need to be considerate of how you put them together. Okay, so let's do something a little bit different now. So I've got this hand-dyed sliver, right, in a variety of different greens. So we'll go from what is almost a blue right the way through to what is a fluoro green. And when I've put it on the blending board, it's all gone in together. Now, when working with green, our color wheel situation tells us that what we shouldn't be working with are pinks. We should work with the ones next to it, right? We could maybe put a bit of purple in, but we have to be careful because they're both secondaries. What we shouldn't be working with, theoretically, are the pinks. And that's true if I was using really intense pink or magenta and really intense green. But I'm not. I've got a beautiful soft green here. So I can either pair that with a really, really vibrant pink, or even with a soft pink. I could go either way. However, if I just start going over the top of this with a layer of pink, you're gonna get some interesting kind of colors. And I don't know if you can see it. Let's bring it down here. If I go over the top of a soft green with a pink, it will start to muddy, okay? You will get a brownish fibre at the end. I love pink and green together, and so I have frequently spun pinks and greens together. And close up, the yarn is absolutely stunning, beautiful. But from a distance, you really do get this kind of brownish color. So again, think about what you are putting in. It may be that you want to come in with some neps. Okay, so these are pink neps, a bit of a mixture between pinks and some that are more of a red. Okay, and I can come in with this, and when these get spun in, you actually get a really beautiful effect with these not blending into the yarn but standing out. Okay, so I can put on some neps. That's one way that I can work with these colours that are opposite each other on the colour wheel. Another thing I could do would be to come in with some silk. So this is a recycled sari silk. Okay, so if I use that, that won't blend in to the underlying yarn quite as much as if I used another merino. Mulberry silk would work just as well, so mulberry silk like this. And you can see the difference here if I put some mulberry silk just here between a lighter pink and the darker one. Okay, again, this is going to soften. These are going to be quite dramatic. Okay, so you get this sort of misty, almost greyish type effect. I am using these complementary colours on the opposite sides of the colour wheel together. But I'm considering how I'm using them, and I'm using them in ways where the two colours will still get the opportunity to stand on their own, and they won't be completely blended together. So if you try and get your complementary colours and you try and blend them together, either by blending them on a blending board or spinning 2 singles and then plying, you're gonna end up with your muddy, dull colours that just don't sing from a distance. Okay, if you want nice vibrant colours, then keeping your complementary colours to things that will spin up a little bit separately and will stand out from each other. The other thing you know is by using the really vibrant pink against these very soft greens, it's not going to blend into the greens in a big way. It's going to stay pretty separate. This softer one will blend in a bit more, especially if I pull it through like that, and you can see it's gone kind of greyish. Okay, so you'd get more of a greyish effect with it. Okay, so that will blend in because of the way I'm putting it in, because these are still fine, and if I pull it through the whole way like this, it blends in. If I take off a chunk like that and I put it in like so, that's going to be more likely to spin up as a separate piece. Just going to lift that up so you can see. So you see when you spin this, you'll get these pops of the things that are inside. Okay, so that'll pop. It won't all spin up together, you'll sort of get shoots through. So I hope you got something out of today. I hope you've had a bit of inspiration to try something different with how you're going about using colour. And something that's worth keeping in mind is nothing's really wrong. You know, you can't go wrong. The colours that you choose are the colours that you choose and the colours that you like. But if you are looking for a particular result, having a good solid understanding of colour theory and what is going to happen when you use colours in certain ways is really, really important. I hope to see you online over the weekend. Enjoy.